Hey guys, welcome back to Run Renovation, where today you're joining us for part of our Fireplace remodel series. And today we're going to be learning how to build this piece of furniture, which can easily be converted into a built-in next to your fireplace. Here we go. The first thing I'm going to do is take the table saw and use it to remove the rounded edges on all of my 2x4s that I'm going to be using as the four corners of this piece of furniture. All right, next I'm going to adjust the fence on my table saw to cut 2 inches and an eighth thick piece that will be the front portion of the corner that you will see on the piece of furniture. All right, now that I have it ripped, I'm going to cut it to 34 inches in length, and I'm going to need 4 of them, 1 for each corner. We have our 4 legs cut out to 34 inches in length. Now we'll go ahead and rip 16-inch sections of this 3/4 inch plywood to start with the 2 sides of the piece of furniture. The sides will be 31 inches long by 16 inches wide. Whenever you're setting your drill bit for your pocket hole jig, you want just the tip to come out, so you'll line this up with the end of the bore where you're going to clamp it, and then you'll adjust the hex screw or nut. That way it sticks out just like that. So I have the side here, and I have a couple clamps to hold it together. So there's one, and here's the other one. And I have our pocket holes drilled, and now I'm going to stand it upright so I can make sure that the reveal is correct on here. So this piece of plywood here, that it doesn't extend past the legs of the piece of furniture. Now we have one side finished, and we'll do the other side. Now that we have the sides finished, we're going to do the bottom. The actual piece of furniture is going to be 54 inches wide after you put the baseboard in, but this piece, the bottom that will be on the bottom of the piece of furniture, will be 52.5 inches long by 18 7/8 inches, and then we'll cut out a spot for the legs. So we have the bottom cut out, and we flipped the sides over, put the bottom on top of it, and now we're going to pre-drill so that we don't split any plywood, and we're going to drill some screws down into here, and I'm just putting 5 screws along from the bottom into the sides. The back was just shy of 48 inches at 47 7/8 inches, and the height was 31 inches, just like the sides. Now that we have the back in, I'm going to go ahead and mark where I'm going to put pocket holes, but instead of putting them on the inside, I'm going to put them on the back side of this so that you will not see anything from the outside of the cabinet looking in. As we're screwing the screws into the 2 sides from the back, you want to make sure that the sides are square so that whenever you're tying these all in, that everything is at a right angle and everything is square. So we have the back secured. I'm going to go ahead and screw in the bottom into the back, and I'm going to pre-drill it first, that way I don't split it. Here are my drawings when deciding what to do, and I'm gonna go with this one, but it's easier to see here. I need to create these vertical pieces and this horizontal piece. And so to do that, I'm going to rip the remainder of that 2x4 that we had from earlier to a 3/4 inch thickness, which will match the thickness of my plywood. Now I'm gonna cut my lengths that divide the cabinets from the drawers. Now I'll drill a couple pocket holes on the bottom side of this to attach it to each side, and I'm gonna come up 22 inches to the top of this piece. All right, so I have my two vertical pieces that will divide the cabinets from the drawers. They're 21¼ inches long, and I'm gonna put another piece right here, and I'm gonna put it like this instead of sideways like that. Then I'll attach this piece of trim to it that'll go right underneath the top. So I did pocket holes on the top side of this and on the bottom side. I faced them to the inside because you won't be able to see it because there will be drawers here. And I'm using 1¼ inch screws. Keep in mind that if you're going into the top with 1¼ inch screws, you will have to clip just the tip because otherwise it's going to go through and show on this top part. This piece across the top is 47 7/8 inches long by 1½ inches tall. Now that I have the pieces on the front of the furniture, I'm going to cut out plywood to fit this space for my shelves, and then also plywood here to divide the cabinets from the drawers. So I have my pocket holes on the underside of this shelf, and I'm gonna screw that to this front piece. And then for the back, I'm gonna drill in from the back into this board. After that, I'll take my measurements for the pieces that will separate the cabinets from the drawers, because screwing the back into the shelf will pull it forward, which will change the depth dimensions for those two pieces. Throughout the video, you'll see me cut to my mark with the circular saw so my cut doesn't extend onto the next piece of wood. I use my jigsaw to finish up the cuts in order to maximize the use of my materials. The plywood that separates the drawers from the cabinets was 21¼ inches high by 16¾ inches deep. I used pocket holes to attach it to the front of the cabinet, which will be hidden by the drawers, and attach the rear by screwing in through the back side of the furniture. Make sure that everything is square when you're installing these two pieces, because the functionality of your drawers depends on it. For the trim around the base of the furniture, I ripped a 1x4 to 2 13/16 inches in width and used this decorative trim on the top so it would be exactly flush with the floor of my cabinet. I used 45-degree mitered cuts for all of the base trim. So I have a little jig that I created for a design, and I'm gonna do this on the front baseboard. Because this is such a long span, and I don't want this to sag over time with the weight of whatever we have in here, I'm going to slide this underneath, and I cut out just the bottom portion of this so that you won't be able to see it. With my decorative trim, you won't be able to see this support piece underneath there. Now that we have the basic frame together, we'll go ahead and sand everything down to get a nice finish, and then we'll come back and put the bottom piece of trim on. I attached all of the base trim with my brad and finish nailer. So when you're installing this top piece of trim, if you attach it to the bottom first, then you can adjust, move it slightly to be able to get it in line with this piece of wood right here, and it'll be flush. All right, so I picked this piece out for the transition piece from the furniture to the top. I'm just gonna tack it in a couple places, and then once I get my top finished, then I'll go ahead and secure the rest of it. Next, we're gonna cut out our wood for our drawers. My drawer dimensions were 6.5 inches high, 14 1/4 inches wide, and 17 1/4 inches long / deep. And now that we have our drawer constructed, I'm gonna route out with a router the width of my board that I'm gonna be putting here in the bottom. I did use a test piece. I wanted it to be 1/4 inch up from the bottom of the drawer, and that's where I want it to slide in. And I only want the depth to be about 1/4 of an inch because the board that I'm using for the sides is a 1/2 inch. So I don't want it to be too deep to where that would compromise the strength of the side of the drawers. So I'll go ahead and start to route it out. If you're trying to find the dimensions for the bottom of your drawer, you can turn the front or back piece around to help you visualize where it would be, and then measure the distance between the routed slots on the sides of your drawer for the width. You'll do the exact same thing for the length, but you'll subtract the thickness of the plywood you're using and then add the depth of the slot that you routed. If you assembled your drawer differently, you might have to adjust the way you get your measurements. As you assemble the drawer, use a speed square to ensure that all of the corners are square. Using a clamp to hold everything in place will be helpful when you're assembling the drawer. We have a couple drawers made. We're going to make the last one. I'm using some ball bearing slides, drawer slides. You want to leave a 1/2 inch on either side, so 1 inch total, less than the width of your opening that the drawers are going in. The length is not as difficult to figure out because one, you can always make it shorter, you just don't want it so long that it's going to stick out. If you're doing flush mount drawers, you just want to make sure it can go far back enough and use the width of whatever the face of your drawer will be to make sure that it's going to recess back in here. You can always add some shims to the back to bring it up a little bit, but like I said, the width is probably the most important thing. All right, so I have my 3 drawers finished, and I'm going to measure the gap. They're all stacked on top of each other. I'm going to measure the gap from the top, and then I'm going to divide that by 4 because I have a space here at the top, a space at the bottom, and 2 spaces in between them. And then I'll mount all of them accordingly. I didn't go into how to install ball bearing slides in this video, but if you'd like to know how, click the link to my video on how to install ball bearing slides. Now that we have the drawers in, we are going to do the face or trim for the drawer. This is a drawer that I've previously made in the look that I'm going for. I created this by taking a 1x4 and ripping it into 1 5/8 inch strip. Then I ran it through the router table in order to add this profile. You can achieve this look by purchasing a separate piece of trim, but you'll save money in the long run if you have a router table. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do that process. Once you have your trim cut to length, you can start to install it on the front of the drawers. I left about 1/8 of an inch gap around the edges, used some scrap wood to set my gap as I installed each piece of trim, and started at the bottom and worked my way up, making sure the top pieces of trim wouldn't interfere with the drawers above it opening. Now that I have all the trim on, I'm going to sand the faces of the drawers to make everything smooth. Now that I have my drawers finished, I'm going to create the top. I'm using 3 1x8s, and I want to have 3/8 of an inch overhang all the way around with a little more on the back. So the final dimensions for the top will be 53 inches by 21 inches. I'm not going into depth on how I created the top by joining pieces of wood together in this video, but feel free to click the link to see how I did it. If you don't want to create your own top, you can always buy one pre-assembled. Next, I created the cabinet doors by ripping 2 1/4 inch pieces of wood and then used my rail and style router bits to slot my joints. I always start by marking which side is the front of the board, or the side that everyone will see, and that side will always be face down when running it through the router table. Start with the bit that contains the bearing in the middle, mark 1/8 inch from the top of the wood, and then line up that mark with the bottom of the top blade. After swapping the bit, you'll want the top blade to be in line with the tongue of the board you've previously cut, such as this. An easy way to make sure that the rails are properly set is by putting a ruler against both sides of the fence and the bearing of the bit and making sure that the ruler lays flat against all three. Once you have the cuts done along the inside and on both rails, it'll fit together just like that. And then you'll be able to put your cabinet piece on the inside. In our instance, we're going to use glass. When measuring for the length of your rails, measure the full width of the cabinet door opening. Subtract the gap or reveal you want around the door. I wanted 1/8 inch gap on both sides, so that's minus 1/4 inch total for me. Subtract the width of your stiles or vertical pieces. Mine were 2 1/4 inches each, so that's 4.5 total for those. And then you need to add 3/4 of an inch back for the 3/8 inch slot that gets removed from either side of the rail by the router. All right, so the glass arrived for our piece of furniture, and you can see here's the pieces that we cut and routed out. I have sanded them down already, and so we're gonna glue them, clamp them, make sure they're square, and then we'll put the hinges on them. When assembling the cabinet door, apply glue to both sides of every joint. I would recommend using a small paintbrush to help spread glue evenly throughout the joint. Once you have each joint glued and assembled, you can use a clamp to hold everything together, and I'd recommend standing the door up vertically on a flat surface to make sure the door is square and the joints are even. If you haven't installed hinges before, I would recommend practicing on a scrap piece of wood. The hinge location can be determined by measuring from the top and bottom of the door until you've reached 1/5 the height of the door. So for these doors that are around 20 inches tall, I would come in 4 inches from the edge of the top and the bottom to set my hinges. There are jigs you can purchase such as this for making the location where you want to install the hinge on the door, but all you need to know is that the edge of the bit should be 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch from the edge of your door. This is what the bit that routes out the hinge looks like, and you'll want to recess it until all you can see is the dark color on top of the bit. While you're drilling, it might be helpful to have your hinge close by to make sure that you drill deep enough, but not too deep. Once the plate portion of the hinge is touching the wood, your depth is good and you can move on to the next hinge. Now that we have our holes drilled for our hinges, I'm just going to use a regular handheld screwdriver, and I'm going to make sure that this is in line with this so that it's not crooked. So I'm going to hold it straight like that, and then we can use our screws for any other adjustments once we get it installed. All right, so we're going to be doing inset hinges, and the mount for it needs to go 1.5 inches back plus the thickness of the door, which will be right about here. So we're going to take this piece of wood and I'm going to glue it in place so we have something to adhere to, which is going to block these pocket holes, and also for any other pocket holes you may have, there are plugs that you can put in there, and that's what we're going to use to sand ours flush and make a smooth finish. So once you measure in 1.5 inches plus the thickness of the door, which in my case is 2 1/4 inches, you'll get your straight edge. I marked a few points, and then you will trace a line. So now we know where our screws land for the hinge. A good way to set the other half of the hinges without wrestling the door is using a scrap piece of wood with the same hinge locations. This will allow you to make a couple of your adjustments before getting the door completely installed. Next, you can install the second half of the other hinge and then make any needed adjustments to set the gaps around the door. I use a magnetic door latch to keep my door closed and flush with the face of the cabinet. You can recess it the thickness of your door, 3/4 inches in my instance, and then there are some minor adjustments that can be made on the mount itself. Make sure that you take the recessed measurement with the metal plate attached that will be installed on the door. Next, to mount the plate, you can close the door and then draw a line to mark where the magnet is, and then you'll install it on the back side of the cabinet door. All right, to attach the top, I have these little L brackets. I'm going to do couple in the back, 3 on each side, and 1 or 2 on the front. I changed my design slightly by going from a 1-light cabinet door to a 4-light door. Unfortunately, I decided to make this design change after the glass was already ordered. If I had to go back, I would have ordered 4 panes of glass for each door, but instead of ordering new glass, I used my rail and style bits to make a cross in the middle of the door and had to remove the back half of the wood with a multi-tool so it would lay flat against a single pane of glass. All right, so here's our trim. As you saw, I used the table saw to rip the back side off of this, and I used my multi-tool to rip the back side off of this. So it looked like this before, and I used the multi-tool to cut that off. I'm gonna paint the back side of this. That way it's white and not raw wood on the other side of the glass. And then I'm gonna glue it all into place. Once all of the hardware to attach the top is finished, you can disassemble all of the hardware in order to prep for paint. Once the hardware is removed, you can install any plugs for your pocket holes by applying a little bit of glue and then tap them flush with a hammer. Wipe up any excess glue with a damp cloth. After painting my first coat, I used caulk to hide any seams that showed up, and then I applied my second coat. When you're marking for the holes in the drawer hardware, you want to get the center of the drawer, so you'll measure half of the height and half of the width. So this is 7 by 15, so that's 3.5 by 7.5 to find the center. And then you'll divide the distance between the 2 holes on the hardware by 2, and then go to the left and the right from there. So this is 3 3/4 inches that it's separated by, so I'll go 1 7/8 inch to each side, mark my holes, and then I'll be able to drill it to put my hardware on. You can add felt to the bottom of your drawers and attach them using a spray adhesive if you want to make them look a little nicer. So we have the pulls on, which looks way better. And we're not gonna stop here. If you want to stop here, you could stop and have a TV stand or a nice entertainment center. But we're gonna go and build on top of this to make it look more like a built-in, and we're gonna have bookshelves for it. So here we go. Making the top portion of this furniture, I used 1/2-inch plywood that was 48 inches wide and 60 inches tall for the back wall, making the total height for both pieces of furniture just shy of 8 feet. Because the back piece will always be against a wall, I'm going to attach it to the sides with pocket holes. To construct the sides, I ripped a 2x4 to 2 1/4 inches. Unlike the back, I can't hide my pocket holes. Pocket holes are easy and quick, but because this piece might not always have 2 walls on either side, it's best to route out a channel so that the wood is recessed and attach it with glue and brad nails for a cleaner look. I used 3/4 inch plywood for the sides because they needed to be thick enough to hold shelf pins. The sides were cut to 15 1/4 inches and their total width was 17 1/4 inches after adding them to the routed 2x4s. The height totaled 60 inches just like the back. Once I had all the pieces for the sides cut, I attached them using glue and brad nails. Once the sides were assembled, I attached the back to the sides using the pocket hole screws. After getting the sides and back together, I cut out the top piece that would hold everything square. In order to install the top, you'll need to remove the corners so that it'll slide inside the corners of the bookshelf. After adding the top, I added a piece of crown molding, but made sure the total height of the furniture did not exceed 8 feet. Unfortunately, that video and the instructions on how to drill holes for shelf pins got corrupted during the transfer, so I'll have to create another video for those at a later date and post the link. Once the frame was completed for the top, I built my shelves using 3/4 inch plywood with a 1 by 1.5 inch piece of wood for the face or the front lip of the shelf. I attached the lip using brad nails and had to notch out the back corners of the shelves to fit the interior frame of the bookshelf. Once they were completed, we were able to completely assemble the furniture. I attached felt to the bottom of the bookshelf using spray adhesive so it wouldn't scratch the surface of my furniture. I secured it to the bottom using angle iron that I bent to the contour of the shelf. After that, I slid it in place and added the shelves. When we started this video, I said this piece of furniture could easily be converted into a built-in. And the way you would do that is you would stop the trim from wrapping all the way around and cut a straight cut here at the edge of your furniture. And the same with the bottom trim as well. And then you're gonna make the piece of furniture about 1 inch or 2 wider to where it's closer to the wall, and you'll use the trim that's commonly used in cabinets to hide the gap between the wall and your piece of furniture. Also, if you're doing a built-in and you run against a baseboard, you will have to cut your baseboard so that your piece of furniture can slip behind it so that you can have no seam where it meets up with the wall. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, comment below. If you like it, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Peace and God bless.